We all live by stories, whether we even realize it or not. I'm talking about big, sweeping stories that tell us who we are, where we came from, and where we're supposed to be going. They're like the invisible architecture of our world.
But what is the main story? Is it a tale of constant progress, of humanity just marching towards some brighter future? Or maybe it's a more cynical story about power, where it's all about the strong dominating the weak? Or is it just a simple, raw story of survival against all odds? The answer you lean towards, well, that reveals the narrative you're living inside.
So, what do we call these big, all-encompassing stories? Well, philosophers have a fancy term for them, a grand narrative, or sometimes a meta-narrative. It's basically an idea that claims to explain everything, to be the one true story that makes sense of all the little stories happening within it.
Now, for centuries, Western thought was absolutely dominated by one very, very powerful grand narrative, the story of unending progress.
The story kind of goes like this. It all starts with the ancient Greeks, when humanity begins this steady climb out of myth and superstition. Reason gets slowly but surely perfected. It gets harmonized with faith in the medieval period, revived during the Renaissance, and then, bam, it's totally unleashed during the Enlightenment to question everything. And in the modern era, this all leads to science, the ultimate tool of reason, which is going to unlock all the universe's secrets. It's a really neat, tidy, and super optimistic story, right?
But then, in the 20th century, a group of thinkers came along and basically said, hold on a minute, is it really that simple? And this was the postmodern challenge.
The philosopher Jean-François Lyotard summed up the entire movement with just incredible clarity. He defined postmodernism at its very core as a deep suspicion of these big, one-size-fits-all stories. It's incredulity toward meta-narratives. That moment, we just stop believing in a single universal explanation for everything.
So why did this happen? Well, Lyotard points to a few huge factors. The trauma of World War II just shattered that simple myth of progress. The rise of computers and new media flooded us with all these competing stories from all over the world. We started to see that knowledge wasn't always pure, that a lot of the time it was used to justify power. And suddenly, the idea that one story could explain everyone's experience seemed not just unlikely, but honestly kind of dangerous. Okay, so here's the crucial point, the big distinction. Postmodern thought argues we should shift our focus from that one grand narrative, the single story trying to speak for everyone, to what they call local narratives. These are the smaller, really specific stories of particular communities or cultures or individuals. They don't claim to be the only truth, just a truth from a certain point of view.
But this leads to a pretty terrifying question, doesn't it? If the big stories that gave our lives meaning, progress, reason, salvation, if they're all just constructs, are we just left adrift in a sea of meaningless competing tales? What's left?
And this isn't just some abstract philosophical game. The brutal reality of the 20th century gave us the most devastating critique possible. A place and a time like this, it represents the absolute collapse of any simple story of human progress. I mean, in the face of such horror, all those grand narratives just seem to die. And yet, it's from this exact place, this place of absolute despair, that a third, really powerful perspective emerges. And that is the perspective of Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and a Holocaust survivor. Frankl observed something just incredible in the camps. He saw that the people who were most likely to survive weren't always the strongest physically. They were the ones who held on to a sense of meaning, a reason to live, whether it was the thought of a loved one or some project they still felt they needed to complete. His core insight is that meaning can literally transform suffering. So after the war, he developed this incredible insight into a whole school of psychology he called logotherapy. Now, unlike other approaches that might focus on pleasure or power, logotherapy argues that our most fundamental human drive, it's our will to find meaning. It's not about avoiding pain, it's about finding a reason for that pain, a purpose that makes it bearable.
And this just brilliantly shows Frankl's alternative. He basically agrees with the postmodernists that, the big external grand narratives, they might have failed us. But he argues that the need for a story, that search for meaning, is hardwired into every single one of us. So the solution isn't to abandon stories altogether, but to create our own personal narrative, one that gives our individual life purpose, even when we're staring suffering right in the face.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. When you look at the journey we've just taken, from the certainty of modernism to the skepticism of postmodernism, and then finally to Frankl's search for personal meaning, it actually forms a kind of classic three-step argument. So,
First, you have the thesis, modernism's belief in one grand narrative of progress. Then you get the antithesis, postmodernism's skeptical rejection of all grand narratives in favor of smaller local ones. And finally, you get this beautiful synthesis from Frankl. He accepts that the universal story might have collapsed, but he insists on the vital importance of the individual's search for a personal one. Meaning isn't something you find out there in the world, it's something you forge from within.
To put it another way, and I love this metaphor, for centuries we were given a map of the world and told, this is the way, follow this. Postmodernism came along and showed us all the places where that map was just wrong, or biased, or totally incomplete. But Viktor Frankl, he's the one who gave us the tools, the compass, and the courage to start drawing a map for ourselves.
Which brings us to the final, and really the most crucial question. In an age where all the old certain stories are falling apart, and you can't rely on a single universal map to guide you, what is the story that gives your life meaning? What story will you choose to write?